Hello there, this is Raul Handa. I'm the founder and the CEO of the Fortuna Group and the host of the FFTB show. We have an amazing guest today, and I can't wait to dive deep and talk about his journey, what he's done, talk about his views in dentistry, about his philanthropical effort. He's an educator, a dentist. Dr. Khalid Master is an esteemed dentist and co-founder of the Bankview Smile Studios. He's dedicated over 27 years transforming patient care in the UK. An immigrant from India, he overcame many personal and professional struggles to graduate with distinction from the Liverpool University Dental School in summer of 2000. He's treated more than 50,000 patients since then. Dr. Master's commitment to knowledge and excellence is reflected in 1,000 hours of postgraduate study, earning him special interest qualifications in no less than 6 areas, including orthodontics, implantology, and cosmetic dentistry. Renowned for his patient-centered approach, especially with nervous patients, Dr. Master's skills and dedication have earned him over 30 awards. Wow, 30 awards, including UK's Best Dentist and Best Dental Clinic in the United Kingdom twice. His skills are well sought after by patients from across the globe, drawn by superb reputation for exceptional, compassionate care. And all the way from the UK today in our studio here in Dubai, we've got Dr. Master. How are you today?
I'm very well, Raul. Thank you. Thank you for such a warm welcome.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for coming to Dubai. How's the weather been for you?
Excellent. It's certainly warmer than the UK at the moment.
Awesome. Perfect. Alrighty. So, guys, I want to tell you that I had the opportunity of going through Dr. Master's profile, and obviously we'll talk more about it. But what I love about him is that he's truly humble, very grounded, has gone through the struggle of being an immigrant, setting up his studio in the UK and moving up from there. So as always, there's always a why someone takes that path.
Absolutely.
So my first question to you, Dr. Master, is why choose dentistry out of all the other options that you had? Why dentistry?
That's a really good question and a pertinent one, Raul, so thank you. Like with any success story, it normally starts with or stems from tragedy. Along the way, there's a lot of obstacles, but with sharp focus and determination, they can be overcome. And hopefully you'll see when I tell you my story that ultimately it was a triumph over tragedy. So my journey starts of that decision from my grandfather. Now, my grandfather, he hailed from a time when you would be known for your trade or your reputation. So he was a university lecturer in Mumbai, and so in many respects, he was the most learned person in our village. And it's a very small village in Gujarat.
Right.
So people would know him as Master Sahib. And this is where my surname comes from. This is one of the things that often people ask me in the UK, because it's an unusual surname. Where did you get it? So it comes from my grandfather and his trade.
Right.
Now, because of that high esteem that he was held in, he had 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters. So my father being the son, obviously not only being the only son, but as a son, he looked up to his father. Most sons do. But in his case, it was more than that because he held him up as a role model.
Right.
So he actually wanted to follow in his footsteps.
Right.
Now, so when he came of age and he was in his 20s, he embarked on his university journey.
Right.
But within the first year, this is where the tragedy struck. And the tragedy was that my grandfather, unfortunately, he suffered a very severe stroke that left him hemiplegic. So he couldn't use one half of his body. This was very sudden. He was also hailing from a generation, not in a bad way, but he was proud. He was proud on the basis that he was self-sufficient. He was the man of the house, the patriarch. So for him to find overnight that he couldn't even go to bathe himself or go to the bathroom, and he needed help from other people, this was quite significant for him.
Right.
More than that, obviously, with my two aunts being the only people in the house, my grandmother then contacted my father, who was in another city studying, and she told him about what happened. And obviously, she said, "Look, you're going to have to pause whatever you're doing. You have to come back to the village. This has happened to your father. You're going to have to take over the reins. You're going to have to act as the role of patriarch and look after your father as well." And his ill health, so he came rushing back. His main priority obviously was taking him for hospital appointments and seek medical care. Now, being in a village, obviously he had to go to the nearest city. The nearest city was Baruch. Now, even there, they found that his situation was so severe that he would have to go to Surat, the next city after that.
Right.
So a lot of time was taken by his bedside whilst he was seeking care. And because his situation was quite serious, even the most highly respected doctors said, "Look, in all fairness, Mr. Master, your father is in a situation where we can't help him. We can't make him better. The best advice we can give him and give you is take him home, let him have some dignity, let him be around the people that love him and know him. And we suspect that it's going to be weeks or months before he passes." Okay. Now, he's also of that generation which were fighters. And he fought this problem, and rather than being weeks and months, it turned out to be years. Now, my father's studies, they stopped in his early 20s, and this then went on for about 4 or 5 years.
Right.
So by the time my grandfather passed, my father was now of an age, he also had got married, I had been born as well. So it came at a point where he himself kind of gave up on his dream. But he passed that legacy on to me. Okay. And me being his eldest and first son, I have a younger brother, we have no sister, so it's a small unit. But in a way, it was a good thing because it gave me a sense of purpose, or he gave me a sense of purpose very early on in life. But it was also a responsibility and potentially a burden on me. But, at that age, obviously, you're very young. You'll just do whatever your father tells you. So he then made plans, because we're still in India at this stage. Now, he himself and my grandfather had lived for a while in Zambia. Now, this was soon after it had gained its independence, and he himself, actually, my father had his schooling at Prince Philip High School in Lusaka. So he'd had his education in English. My two aunts, his two younger sisters, also were educated. They were actually born there as well. So what he knew was that if he wanted to give me my best chance, he needed to leave India. And then initially we went to Zambia. So the plan was to maybe have my schooling there. But as an ex-colony, it had a quota system. And the quota system meant that a certain number of people who had British passports, who were foreign born, they could enter the UK. Mm-hmm. So our quota system, he came up within 9 months. So it then transpires at the age of 4, I find myself in the United Kingdom. And that was ultimately his aim, because he knew that whatever education system the expat community had exported, ultimately the main mothership was the United Kingdom and England itself. So it's that then, when I was 4 years old, he started to make those plans. So the plan was for me not to just have any education system. Ultimately, that was the ultimate vision. But he'd also laid down the individual steps. So the first step was to get me into a Roman Catholic primary school. Now, what's interesting is that I had to actually walk past 2 other schools to get to this school as a third school. Now, the local education authority, they will give you your nearest school. So when my father appealed that and said, no, I would rather have this one, they were quite shocked. They were shocked on a few levels. Firstly, because this Roman Catholic primary school would only normally take white, natural Roman Catholic people. Now, as an Indian Muslim, this was going to be a big hurdle. So the school was reluctant. The local education authority was reluctant, but my father persevered. And with appeal after another appeal, finally they gave in. In fact, I think that there came a point where the school was more intrigued as to how I was going to do, because my father had put so much emphasis on how clever I was and how well I was going to do. Now, he and we all got a shock when my first report came. I still have it. I know when I was in reception primary school, and it started by saying Khalid is a chatterbox. Now, that's okay. It's okay to be a chatterbox, but the thing is, the next line was the more intriguing one, which is, we wouldn't mind if he spoke in English. He's actually speaking in Gujarati. And then what is more, he's insisting on other people speaking in Gujarati to him, because I couldn't understand why no one could understand me.
Right.
And I'd, literally come weeks and months before. So
I can imagine.
I think it's fair to say that I started off, it was a baptism of fire, both within the primary school. I was one of only 3 Asian children in the whole school. So that's interesting in itself. I know it's a little bit of a sidetrack, but I thought it was a relevant one because, like you've said, fortune favors the brave. This is an element of courage that my father had in me and entrusted that in me.
Right.
This then went through. Obviously, I did very well at school. He made sure of it, because the other thing is that you have to remember this is the late 70s. Now, in the United Kingdom, I think it's fair to say in those times the racism was fairly open.
Right.
For anyone who was non-Caucasian, non-Anglo-Saxon, non-native, their trials were difficult.
Right.
There was a strong force, the National Front at the time, and right-wing forces wanted these people to go back to the country that they came from and so forth. They didn't really see that England as a welcome home for them. So, you had to fight tooth and nail to be able to achieve anything. So my father had told me from a young age that, Khalid, listen, you have to not just try your best, you have to be the best.
Right.
And it's not just about being the best in your class, because the thing about it is that your real competition is outside of the school. It's the wider society that you have to go to.
Right.
And so ultimately, if there is a person who is equal to you, who is naturally born English or with white skin, they're going to get that job or situation over and above you. So you have to be even better than them in order for you to then make it very difficult for that other person to say no to you. And that had been put into me from a young age, and everything around me and my experiences taught me that this was true.
Right.
But being as good as the next person, or being within the top 3 or the top 5 of something wasn't going to be good enough. So this progressed through my education. I knew that was my foundation. That was my goal. So I excelled in primary school, I excelled in high school, did well in college. Now, it was when I was in college and I'd picked my sciences as my A-levels. Originally, my dad's plan was for me to be a doctor. Okay. And so I know it's very cliched for an Indian parent for their son to be a doctor, but ultimately that's what his aim was. And he'd come from an educational background. He knew that was going to be that ladder through which the next generation was going to do better than the previous generation. Right. Now, in my A-levels, the first time I sat them, I got good grades, but they weren't good enough. And it's actually the first time in my life that I put my heart, soul, and energy into something and I didn't achieve my outcome. Right. So this was the first time I applied for medicine. Liverpool University had been kind enough to give me an offer, and it was actually, in those times, it was quite a low offer, so it should have been easily met. Now, I was only 1 grade off in 1 subject, and that's how close I was to achieving my dream. Okay. And so when I then found out that I was that close, but yet I didn't manage to achieve what I wanted, actually it had a negative impact on me, because I thought to myself, this has never happened before. I got this close and I didn't get in. What's going on? My world came crashing down around me. And so this is when my father, he gave me the opposite perspective. We all know the classic glass is half full versus half empty. Right. I was certainly looking at it as it being only half empty. He was saying, no, the opposite is true, it's half full. If you came this close and yet you didn't achieve your aim, there is a greater purpose waiting for you. What you have to do, you have to persevere. You have to stay on this path and you've got to carry on. And this is an obstacle. We must overcome this obstacle and resit your examinations, do the best you can. This time, second time round, I'm sure you will get through. And so I did my resits. Now, that was difficult because all my friends were going off to university.
Right.
I'm staying in the town that I grew up at the college. They're all moving on, but I'm still stuck. But I knew that there was a greater purpose, so I put my energy into that. Now I sat my exams again. Now some universities, they don't accept students who have sat their exams twice. Once, if you don't get it, they move on. There's lots of other candidates. So Liverpool was, again, I was fortunate. They actually gave me a second chance and they gave me a second offer. Now, they say the lightning can't strike twice. It can. I'm living proof because the second time round, again, I was one grade off in one subject. So you can imagine, this is me trying my very best. Having already tasted defeat once, I now am looking into this chasm thinking, I've now given it my best shot. I've still not got into medicine. So now a lot of soul searching because now even my father is thinking, you know, what's going to happen? We've given it our best shot. He's tried his best. I've tried my best. Is this not meant to be? So at this stage, I was now thinking I must still go to university because now I'm 2 years. I've been 3 years at college. Other people are entering their second year, third year. So Liverpool, they offered me an alternative degree, biomedical science. This is a very good, respectable degree. It's a bachelor's of science degree. And I started that path. But it was very clear within a few weeks that I was not in the right place. This wasn't right for me. This course wasn't right for me. And within a few weeks, I think I came home. Both my parents saw me and understood that I was not. I wasn't in the best frame of mind. I wasn't a happy person, and I couldn't see 3 years through like this. So it's actually then I had a fortuitous conversation with two people, and I owe them a lot. One is a pharmacist. His name is Riaz. He's a good friend of mine. He was the year above me in college. And there's another person called Sufyan, and he's a fellow dentist, again, another year above me. They said, listen, you have to change tact. So Sufyan said, even if you were going to be a doctor, you would have had to specialize in something. And that something, what would that specialism be? I said, well, look, I haven't studied the course. I don't know which course and on which specialism. He said, listen, let me pick for you. We will pick orthopedics, right? So I can see you being a surgeon. You're good with your hands. You've got a lot of manual dexterity. You've got knowledge of science. I don't see you being a physician or a general practitioner. So, let's say you're going to be a surgeon. So you know that there's a pathway involved with that. And that pathway potentially is another 8 or 9 years, houseman, senior houseman, registrar, senior registrar, consultant. Before you make consultant, you're always working under the auspices of someone else. You're not the boss. You're just doing, and you're part of an important team member, but a team member. But if I was to tell you a degree where you would be a specialist on the day of graduation that is a subsection of healthcare and medicine, would you be interested? I said, of course I would. This is what I've always wanted. So he said, why don't you try dentistry? Now, and that thought had never occurred to me or my father at that stage. And I responded in the worst way that you can to a dentist, which is, I don't want to be a dentist. Why would I want to put my fingers in other people's mouths? Now, obviously, he gave me a virtual slap across the face because this was his profession. He was already studying for it. So he said that, listen, my friend, ultimately, it's all about poking in orifices one way or another, and they're all dirty. What's the difference between that and gastrointestinal medicine, ENTs, so on and so forth? So that's what made me think and rethink that actually, have I potentially missed my calling, or can I deviate slightly into something that is allied to medicine or is a subsection of medicine, but I wasn't my original focus. So this is when I met Riaz and I told him this story, and he said, yeah, but how are you going to get in? This was the hard part, because you now have to convince the university. Twice you've applied for medicine and not got in. They already offered you biomedical science, and now you're having almost a third go at this. So how are you going to tell them? And I said, well, I'm going to just be honest. Honesty is the best policy. I always feel that if you tell them what's happening and it's transparent, but you're passionate about what you're aiming to do,
Right.
hopefully that will come through.
Right.
And that's ultimately what happened. I went to the interview, I told them that this was my story. It's still a branch of medicine, and this is what I want to do. Please give me a chance. And I'm very fortunate. The admin tutor, he agreed, he accepted. I got my place. And as they say, the rest is history, really. So, I did my 5 years, passed well, and then went on to a degree, a career in dentistry.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, a long-winded way, but I hope that along the way
I was
there
hoping
was.
that the lightning shouldn't have struck me the third time.
Yeah.
But so before we move on to the next question, it seems that you failed twice and at a very early age.
Yeah.
Very sensitive age. We were in the UK. Always, when you're an immigrant in another country, you always have that pressure, and you're an Asian.
Absolutely.
There's more pressure to do well. Today, after so many years, when you look back, how do you take failure today? Let's say if you were talking to me,
Yeah.
and I was an 18-year-old,
Yeah.
and I'd probably gone through the same thing. Today, a lot of youth struggles with identifying what they want to do.
Yeah.
I know someone who's tried 4 different types of engineering and still cannot figure out what he wants to do, and he
Yeah.
feels like a big failure.
Yeah.
And he called me once at 2 in the night, was drunk, and he just cried and wept, and and he didn't know how to handle it. For someone who's young, because you've gone through it, and you can relate to it, what would your advice be? How do they take failure? How do they today, with social media and with everyone looking at you and judging you, how do you swallow that poison and move on?
A very good question, and I agree with you. So I agree with almost everything you've said, that there's a generational difference. Of course, I'm from a slightly older generation, and also that they have added pressures. Social media, as the saying goes, a knife can be used to cut or to kill.
Absolutely.
And it's a very powerful medium. We know that if you use it to your advantage, you can make big strides in the world. But if you unfortunately fall foul of it, it can be extremely damaging. We know of many stories and instances, tragic ones, where people have committed suicide of things that they've read online about themselves, or bullying or cyberbullying and so on. So my advice, if I was to see this person and talk to them, my first and main bit of advice is always understand that failure is something that is on the route to success. Success can only come at the end of a path that has had failure within it. That's guaranteed. Any successful person will tell you. And it's not the fact that you fall down, it's the fact that you have the wherewithal to pick yourself up and carry on. And that's the key. And you might take a few side roads, you might take the scenic route, as my father used to say, but it's the destination that matters, and that you must keep trying. And if you try at one thing and it doesn't quite work, take a slight sidestep and take something similar, because you must have been interested in that first thing for a reason, whether it's from your own personal side or from a family member's side or a careers advisor. So I wouldn't say stray too far from there, but try something that's very similar or analogous and have a go at that. And understand that your journey, everyone's journey is different. Your journey might be one that takes a little bit longer. But as I say, and when I give careers advice to younger people who want to go into medicine and dentistry, I always say this to them, that from my own personal journey, I never say wasted, I always say that I utilized 2 or 3 extra years before I got to my year 1. I got to a point where in my university, when I was sharing with some of the students, that because dentistry is a 5-year degree, so is medicine, these people were on bachelor's degrees. They'd done 3 years.
Right.
One had done a master's, and he was halfway through a PhD, and I hadn't even graduated, because they are on their journey, and their journey happens to be faster and shorter.
Right.
Mine was different.
Right.
It was more protracted. But what I say to those people is, most people, if you're blessed with a long life,
Right.
most people will retire around the age of, or will want to, 60 or 65. Most people will finish their studies in their mid-20s. So what I say to them is, you've got 40 years of potentially a long career. when you think about that, sacrificing or utilizing 2 or 3 extra years at that beginning is going to be so worthwhile. Because what you don't want is to get to a scenario where you rush something, get to the end, and then have a whole lifetime of regret. Because if you look back and think of things that you could have done, things that you should have done but never did, unfortunately, you will be filled with regret and remorse. Whereas if you have focus and direction and you start with that longer journey to begin with, and then hopefully you will see the fruits of that labor. So be patient and keep trying.
Interesting. 50,000 treatments. It's a lot of treatments.
It's a lot, yes.
A lot of mouths.
Yes.
A lot of teats.
Yeah.
Jokes apart. And I'm sure, as someone, as a doctor, it's difficult to remember, but I know doctors always remember, the first case.
Yeah.
The most impactful case, or a patient who's left a huge impact on you, or a challenging case where you had to pull in all your head.
Yeah.
So is there one, any case or any specific patient that you'd like to tell us about, maybe a story that you remember, which has been one of the most challenging, invigorating, and maybe stressful, yet humbling experience?
Yeah. A great question. Absolutely great. What I would say is you're exactly right. Because dentistry is one of those professions which is multifaceted.
Correct.
There's elements of biology, there's elements of chemistry, elements of engineering, elements of artistry, sculpture, painting, communication, business, patient management, and communication. So every single patient has has their own challenges. Usually one of those, sometimes a few. But I think trying to pick from the tens of thousands, you're right, is very difficult. But having said that, because you've framed the question in such a good way, there is one particular case that does come to mind where about 5 or 6 of these came together at once. And you're also right, where those cases, although in the end were the most rewarding, they were also the most stressful and the most challenging along the way, because you do question yourself sometimes. As you've said and in your introduction, that dentistry has many specialisms. So I'm primarily a generalist. So I do general dentistry, and then I gained specialist interests almost at a later stage on a postgraduate basis. So this particular case that I'm thinking of, she was a young lady, and she came to the practice through her son. So her son became my patient, or she ensured that her son became my patient because she'd heard about me. But the issue is that she was agoraphobic. So this is a person who is fearful of leaving their home. So this person actually just predominantly stayed in the home and was even fearful of outside spaces and other people.
Oh, man.
This is very serious.
Okay.
Now, so as a consequence, you'd think, well, how would that person get their son?
Right.
So she used to send her husband. So her husband was the person who would come and bring his son. And he got to know me through, obviously, me treating his son. So he used to tell his wife, look, there is this dentist and he's very good and you should go and see him, in a kind way, out of kindness, because she knew she had multiple dental problems.
Right.
But because linked with that fear, linked with with that condition was also extreme fear, because it's not like she's never had an experienced dentistry. The issue was that every single time she plucked up the courage to leave the house to go and seek care, she had been traumatized. So that trauma could have been clinical trauma, it could have been pain. So the experience was never a positive one. And what that would do, it was negatively reinforcing for her to say, I told you, don't go. These people will hurt you, and they are not going to allow you to succeed in what you want. And you're going to have to give too much of yourself for this. So her husband managed to convince her. It took many years. Mm-hmm. I think it took about 4 or 5 years.
To convince her?
To convince her.
Wow.
I didn't know any of this until she came as her new patient consultation.
Right.
So she was completely a stranger to me and I was a stranger to her, albeit she'd heard a lot through her husband and her son's experience. Her son, because this is unusual within dentistry, that patients look forward to appointments. this is, for most people, certainly in the UK, and I think that it stands globally as well, it's something that you need to do. It's very few things, very few people who want to do it. So
Right.
people take their dental appointments as somewhat of a necessity,
Correct.
but not something that they would look forward to, or
Correct.
something that
Correct.
is a positive experience. So her son was very different. He used to love coming. He used to talk about me. He used to do the things that I asked him to do. She could see his behavior changed, and he was growing into a young person.
Right.
I saw him before he even started school, and he is now halfway through primary school. So this gave her the courage that maybe, just maybe, this person is slightly different. If he is half as good as I hope, then maybe I have a chance. So she came, and I could tell that she was extremely nervous. And I deal with a lot of nervous people, and I have a technique and a program which will desensitize them. And you know, we managed to do lots of very complicated and lots of good work with these people. And they're some of my best referrers, because once you've convinced and turned someone like that around, they always know 10 other people who are like them.
Absolutely.
And they say, go and see this person. So it's a good practice builder as well. So this person came, and her main issues were there was actually very few good teeth left. So most of her mouth had been ravaged, either because extractions had been done or teeth were terminal. Their prognosis was very poor. So I was really struggling to even find some good areas to start building some scaffolding and then to build a smile on that. On top of that, she had a very difficult bite. How teeth meet together, there's a special way, and hers was very different. So this was then mechanically and engineering-wise, things were difficult. Also, other complications were that she couldn't open her mouth to a fullest extent. So it was limited. So there was many, many problems.
Right.
And each one of these, for a surgeon, is like a red flag. Because either you have a mental checklist or it's a physical checklist.
Correct.
And what you'll find is, for this procedure to occur, do I have all of these items there? This tick, tick, tick. From her checklist, there was probably only 1 or 2 ticks. Nearly all the others were crosses. So I had to even think, as a generalist with a specialist interest, I had to think to myself, I had a talk with myself, really. I looked at her treatment plan, I looked at her photos, her scans, impressions, I had all the information when she wasn't there, and I had a serious talk to myself. Khalid, can you even do this? Are you up to it?
Right.
Or are you doing the dutiful thing? Because one of the things a surgeon, we all swear the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath, and the first line is do no harm. Don't make a patient's situation worse than it was before you even started. And one of the things that the General Dental Council, which is our essentially union, dental union, and our overarching regulatory body, they will always say, work within your level of competency. Don't bite off more than you can chew. No pun intended, but a dental pun in there.
Right.
And one of the things that I thought was, do I refer this to a specialist prosthodontist? So although I do prosthodontics, I'm not a specialist, and specialists all focus on difficult cases like this. But then on the other hand of the scale, so if we're thinking about this as an old-fashioned scale, and on one hand we had all these problems which would automatically indicate that I should refer this person to a specialist. On the other hand, the biggest one is her as a person, and managing her as a patient. How would she respond if the person who she's come to and put this trust into, would I do right by her by turning around and saying, I cannot help you, but I know someone else who can, and you trust me for you to trust them?
Right.
Now, I thought that was going to be a bridge too far. I thought that if I did that, she would probably not go to visit the other person. She would go back home and just stay there.
Right.
Knowing what I knew and knowing the trouble that she was in, I felt that I'm duty bound. So what I did a hybrid technique. So I did contact a prosthodontist, and I told them, look, this is my case. If you were the person who I referred to, how would you treatment plan? What kind of things would you be looking at, and how would you go about tackling this? So what they did, they kindly provided a template for me, and then I utilized that, and they were there in the background. So I still feel that I did the responsible thing, and she was happy because she didn't have to go to another place. So again, cut a long story short, this treatment plan was almost a year long, believe it or not. So,
Wow.
because everything happens slowly with these people, you can't just dive in.
Correct.
I had to build her confidence.
Correct.
It's something known as systematic desensitization. So, because at Liverpool, I was very fortunate that part of our undergraduate curriculum involves psychology and sociology as part of my undergraduate training. And it's that training that helped me with this patient. And then we got to a point where I could do the more complicated things, and I submitted this as part of my application. So I know you've seen the photographs, and they're very dramatic, from how devastating her starting point was to where I managed to get her at the end.
Right.
Now she's a completely different person. She's someone who is at the front of groups when photos are taken, instead of hiding behind the person, the tall person at the back.
Wow.
You know, this is a person who, you know, is very much more outgoing. She's got a new job.
Wow.
And she's become another person, because I see her son, I now see her husband as well. So I know them as a family. And what her husband has told me about what changes my dentistry has done to her and her life is truly life-changing.
You've changed her life.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's for the power to be able to do that, because
And I think it's
know,
great to have that kind of power and be humble about it
But
and
to utilize
acknowledge it.
Yeah.
You know, that's awesome. Okay. Moving on. So doctor, stressful, dentist, stressful, entrepreneur, even more stressful.
Yeah.
So you already had your hands full, but how did Back You Smile Studio come about? And tell us more about how did you meet your partner and co-founder, Thomas?
Another good question. So I'm a millennial dentist. I graduated in the summer of 2000 from Liverpool, as we know. I did my 1-year training. It's called vocational training in a town called Accrington. So this is in Lancashire. It's about 4 miles from my hometown, so very close. Now, this is in a very socio-economically deprived area. So a lot of people who find a struggle to be able to find a good dentist. Thomas had already been there 2 years before. So he's older than me. He started off as a colleague at this practice.
Okay.
And I ended
And he
up...
was senior to you?
He was senior to me, correct, yes. So I was the junior between the three. So there was the principal, who was the most senior.
Right.
And his name was Philip. He'd graduated from Leeds University in 1979. Then there was Thomas, who graduated from Manchester in 1994, and then myself at Liverpool at 2000. Yeah. So Philip was my mentor. Thomas was my senior colleague. And then what happened very quickly is we became very, very good friends. So he was the senior associate, I was the junior. We both stayed on. I stayed on for a further 9 years after I finished my vocational training at the same practice.
Right.
And Philip, he was the owner. He'd been there from the very beginning, and I learned a lot. So as a mentor, as the first person who was the dentist who would teach me after I graduated from university, he would teach me the ropes. He was very, very experienced. But what had happened is he once described me as a very dry sponge. So being in Dubai, I can understand that this relates because of the heat. So because I said it doesn't sound very nice, Phil. Why do you
sponge?
So why a dry sponge, not just a sponge, but a very dry one? He said, because you are just like moisture is magnetized towards this. Right. He said, it seems like you are magnetized to knowledge. Right. Because you are the only trainee I've had where every day in your own time you will come to me, ask me questions. And he said, after about 2 or 3 years, he said, I have no more to give you. You've learned everything that there is for me to teach you and that I know. So almost distilling, in his case, nearly 20 years of knowledge within 2 or 3 years. I'd already had my own, then I'd gained his. And I remember a year or so later, we went to a postgraduate meeting, and there was another chap on the other side of him. And he was, I think, angling to speak to me, but Phil was obviously in the way. So he made some small talk, asked who Phil was. And then he said, that chap next to you, who is he? So Philip, he said a very nice thing. He basically said that I used to be his mentor and trainer, but he is now my trainer and my mentor. even though he's my junior, because
Right.
there came a point where I was carrying on with my postgraduate journey, learning more things,
Right.
but he
Right.
was carrying on doing general dentistry. So
Right.
there came a point where he would come to me and ask me for advice, which was
Right.
really unusual.
Right.
So this is how everything went. Now, what was interesting though is his philosophy and his values were different to mine. And this is where the birth of Bankview Smile Studios came, because it wasn't the fact that this is what to do. It was more to do with how you go about doing it.
Right.
And that's where the brainchild in my mind came about Bankview Smile Studios, because I wanted to perform dentistry in a particular way, and the system and that particular practice didn't allow me to do that. And like with any entrepreneur, you have this in your mind, because one of the things that you ask yourself is, okay, you think that that's the way you should do it? Go out and prove it.
Right.
Because if you prove it and you are right, you can take all the credit, because this is your vision and this is your embodiment of that vision. But you have to be big enough, you have to be brave enough, you have to have broad shoulders and thick skin. If you fall flat on your face and this thing doesn't work, you have to be ready to go back and eat humble pie and say, maybe your experience and the way in which you did things was the right way. I thought I knew better, but I didn't. And so this is where Bankview came, because it was already a 4-surgery practice. It was the oldest practice in the area.
Wow.
It dates from 1906.
Wow.
Everything in England is old. But this particular practice and the building is even older. So the building I'm in dates from 1868.
My goodness, 1906, you said.
1906. So what happened in 1868 is a merchant had built this as his personal home, and it had 3 components. And in 1906, the large building got broken into 3 buildings. So there's 2 sides in the middle, and the dental practice is in the middle. And it's been providing dentistry continuously since 1906.
Wow.
I have the papers and the heritage of all my predecessors.
Wow.
Because my immediate predecessor, he was ironically and coincidentally, in Phil's class in Leeds. So he's a 1979 graduate.
Wow.
But he did 31 years between then and 2010, because 1st of February 2010, Thomas and I took over Bankview Smile Studios. So he'd been there 31 years, a 3-decade legacy.
Wow.
His predecessor had been there for nearly 30 years. His predecessor,
Wow.
30 years. So that's how it always had
It's
been.
historic.
It's historic.
It's lineage. Oh, my goodness.
And the interesting thing is
Wow.
that in those days, the dentist would live on site. So
Oh.
our first floor is where the dentist used to live, and their commute is just walking down the stairs. And the ground floor is
Oh,
the practice.
man, that is so
And that was
cool.
the case even up to my predecessor. For
Right.
part of the time, he lived upstairs.
Right.
So to have a place where you work and a place where you live for dentists became, being in 2 buildings, actually is only around 30 years old, 40 years old.
Wow.
Before that, you would normally work and live in the same place. So that's where the 4-surgery practice we took over. We embodied the vision from the get-go. And again, it's only external testimony. So internally, we had patients telling us, and the feedback was that as good as a technical dentist, Timothy, so Timothy is the practice owner who we took over from, and very much like Phil, an excellent dentist in the technical side. But I think it's fair to say that from a chairside manner and how you warm to that person, it was different. These people, again, different generation, they would use titles. And titles, even the word doctor, master, as opposed to Khalid, even that creates a barrier.
Yes.
And because I'd done the psychology and sociology and I'd treated nervous patients, I understood that from the very first day, all staff and all patients would call me by my first name and Thomas by his first name. So automatically it's a leveler.
Right.
Because you haven't got that status
Correct.
looking down at a patient.
Correct.
And looking down on a person.
Correct.
And so by being more equal, you're lowering yourself and raising them. So patients would tell us straight away that the culture has changed. And in my surgery, because I took over Tim's patients, time and time again, they would say, coming into the dental office or the practice or the surgery, as we call it, was like walking into a head teacher's office. Now, anyone in school who goes to the headmaster's office, usually you're in trouble. It's very rare you're going to be commended. So normally, that will bring itself its own anxiety, you're already anxious about the fact that you know that dentistry is going to take place there.
Correct.
So if you can somehow break down some of these barriers and say, no, call me Khalid, it's fine. And if you don't mind, I'd like to call you by your first name instead of Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so. And most people were entirely happy. So it's feedback from patients who said, no, this whole environment has changed. The whole air amount, the feeling and atmosphere is changed. So we thought, okay, let's do independent testing. And that's when, interestingly, the first National Best Practice Award came, because it was only, I took over the 1st of Feb 2010. I was picking up the award for the best practice in the UK in December of 2011.
Wow.
Literally 18 months later.
Bravo.
And that was
Bravo.
on the basis that, okay, Khalid, you thought you could do this. You thought that you could do well. Your patients are giving you good feedback. But let's see how you compete against the thousands and thousands of practices in the UK. And are you really doing something special? Are you really doing something different? Let someone independent test that.
Right.
And this was obviously, with such a high title, there was a very high bar with regards to testing. So they tested us through a mystery shop. So one of their clients would act as a patient. We had a physical person come in as a mystery shopper.
Wow.
Okay, because look, I know in your game and in my game, and in most people who are successful or involved in sales of one way or another, one thing is talking the talk, another is walking the walk.
Absolutely.
So this is where they were saying, look, you could say lots of good things about yourself. You could maybe even cherry pick some patients who to say some nice things about you. But they gave us a link to give to patients, all patients, and they filled this out in their own time. And what they would do is they could say good, bad, or indifferent things about you. So it wasn't that it was just fishing for lots of positive things and maybe steering clear of giving the link to patients who might not say nice things about you.
Right.
So in the end, we didn't find this out until after the awards, but we were up against some of the best practices in the UK, you could imagine. And one person who was the owner, in fact, he was someone who I consider as a mentor who I used to look up to. He was in amongst that, and he thought he's definitely won. And then when they announced us as the winners, he honestly thought, who's this young kid over here, and where's Blackburn? You know, that's not even a place in England, because it's so far north,
Right.
and these are all capital within London.
Within London, yeah.
All our competitors were there.
Right.
So he was in Harley Street, which is the most prestigious medical street where treatments take place in London. And so he then went to the awards organizers, interestingly, and said, you know, who is this guy and how on earth did he win over me and my practice? And they had to give him a harsh truth, unfortunately. Again, I found this out later. He said it wasn't even close.
Wow,
His
cool.
name was Mark.
So
He said,
cool.
this guy actually, because the number of people he had responded was, I think, 48. And I had 218.
Wow.
So it was like there was a big gulf. But it's only patients who, they spoke the truth. It was speaking about how we made them feel.
Right.
And that's our philosophy. It's just not about the work that we do, but it's how we do it, how we make you feel in our company, and also how we make you feel about yourself after you leave us.
Wow. Alrighty. Well, I wish we could go on. We've got very little time, so I'll take this one last question real quick.
All right.
You're a passionate philanthropist and educator. Both of these passions combine perfectly in your involvement with AHF. Tell us very quickly what the Abu Hanifa Foundation is, and and how did the idea come about it?
A really good one. So I'll be more succinct with this response. It stems from a predicament. So the predicament is I grew up in Blackburn. Obviously, I came when I was 4 years old. I've always been linked there. And the educational establishment is, we have a 19th century curriculum in 20th century buildings, but with 21st century learners.
Wow.
Now, there is a big discrepancy. So every educational institute in the world will focus on the intellectual literacy of their learner.
Absolutely.
Now, as we know, as spiritual people and as religious organizations, you would then include the spiritual element. But AHF, Abu Hanifa Foundation, which is the brainchild of my good friend Imtiaz Damiel, and he's the founder, but I'm a founding trustee and the chair of the organization. we, together with around 10 people, honestly, it was initially I thought to myself, I can't get involved as much as I believe in the project. I have a very big personal project and something that's linked to my essentially my livelihood. But as Muslims, we know that we should focus on the world as well as the eternity. And you should try and give equal focus.
Absolutely.
So I thought to myself, no, I can't say no to this. I must get involved. So that's how I got involved, that it was an important project. But one of the things that Imtiaz had formulated was a holistic model which had 8 literacies. So we've already covered intellectual and spiritual. But the difference here, and that's what's unique about AHF, is that there is a physical literacy, emotional, cultural, moral, social, and interpersonal.
Wow.
So, and the other thing is
and
that
these are life skills.
These are all
life
absolutely,
skills.
and this is what our vision is. Our vision is to produce the future generations of leaders who lead meaningful, purpose-driven lives to make pioneering contributions to their immediate society and to the world beyond.
Wow.
And that's where the AHF brainchild came. And so it's all about empowering this next generation to do that and to do even better than us as the existing generation of people who have set the foundations for this organization. And we hope for decades and hopefully centuries to come that the people who come out of this institute do big and great things.
That is amazing. Kudos.
Thank you.
Dr. Master, kudos. Well, that was Dr. Master today, a generalist, a philanthropist, an educator, co-founder of Bankview Smile Studios. And I would have never imagined saying a century-old dental practice in the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for taking the time, for flying down and having this special conversation with us. And I wish you the very best.
Thank you.
I think what you're doing as an individual, as a professional, as a dentist, as a philanthropist, is definitely touching a lot of people's lives. I love the concept of the Abu Hanifa Foundation. These are life skills. And I love that you're so passionate about it. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Master.
My pleasure.
I hope we can speak very, very soon.
Yes.
Thanks,
Raul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.